Welcome everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about the recently revealed gameplay for Tears of the Kingdom. Mr. Eiji Aonuma presented to us a lot of gameplay, about 10 minutes worth of footage, and there is a lot to dissect here, so we're going to be going ahead and doing a bit of an analysis. Now, we're not going to catch everything, that's next to impossible, so this is more like an initial analysis, but I did notice some things watching this footage over a few different times, but if you notice anything else or have anything else to add, please do so in the comments below. Now, I will point out that we've been pushing to reach 25,000 subscribers by the time Tears of the Kingdom comes out on May 12th. We've gained some ground, but we still have a long way to go, so if you enjoy my content, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because then we might just make it. No, I'm not going to be going in any particular order here, just in the order of what I have listed here, how I noticed it and put it into my notes. So the first thing I'm going to point out here is that when we see the initial footage, we see a new type of bow that Link is holding, and I'm going to guess that it's a Zonai related bow. Now, why do I think it's a Zonai related bow? Because it's green, it has some of that green energy there, and that's pretty much it, beyond the fact that, well, also Zonai have been confirmed. So when Link is fighting one of the constructs, he destroys it and a few items fall down, one of them including a Zonai charge. So there you have it. This lost magic-wielding tribe that we saw evidence of throughout Breath of the Wild and hints of in the recent trailers with all the dragon symbolism, it's been confirmed. The Zonai are a big part to this game. That has now been made crystal clear. We also now have pretty strong evidence that those green swirls we've seen throughout the surface may also be in the sky now. Before it was speculation based off concept art. Now it seems a little bit more probable. We still don't see the green swirls itself, but we see some structures that look very similar. We also see confirmation that Koroks have returned in this game. That shouldn't come as too much of a shock, but the role seems to have changed somewhat here. So on the surface, as Link is approaching the stable, there is someone saying, "I need to reach my friend." And when you look carefully, it's actually a Korok lying down, trying to get back up on a big backpack that's bigger than it. So what does this suggest? I need to reach my friend. Maybe you're going to be helping Koroks find their friends. Maybe it's not about finding Korok seeds per se, but more about reconnecting different Koroks that have been separated from each other. Maybe his friend is high up in the sky. That's something to consider. So the Korok quests might be a bit more interesting this time around. Here's another big thing that I noticed. There is a lot of building in this game, and I don't just mean the fuse mechanic or the ultra hand mechanic that we'll speak a little bit more on later, but actually towns, it looks like. So we see a few different parts of this footage that show some areas near a stable, and it looks like there is the beginnings for some houses to be built. There's this one shot where we see this small platform with some wood on top, kind of like the beginnings of a house, but there's even a signpost right next to it. Maybe it's supposed to be the name of someone that owns the house, or it could be a sign saying, "Hey, building under construction." But what's also interesting about this is that we see some other structures not too far off that have some stones collected together and something draping over it. Also very much like an initial construction site. So I feel it does support this idea that there will be a lot of building and rebuilding in this Hyrule, which definitely lends more credence to this idea that we could be seeing more of a expanded Tarrytown quest, which was a quest in Breath of the Wild where you help to build up an entire town, except this time it might be throughout the entire game. And when Zelda said at the end of Breath of the Wild that they're going to try and restore Hyrule to its former glory or perhaps beyond, this all seems to sort of add up here. So it looks like there's going to be a lot of building of towns and villages, which to me is extremely exciting. Now let's talk about different things I've noticed about the UI and what it might suggest. So one of the first things I noticed about the UI is that with the mini-map, we actually see some numbers. It would appear that the first two numbers, reading from left to right, are the X and Y coordinates. But it looks like the third number is the Z-axis, in other words, your elevation. And when we take a look at Link falling down and other elements, we see the number dropping down or up depending on what direction he's going. So what's really exciting about this is that now that we have a number system here, if someone wants to point out, hey, where did you find that Korok that was in trouble? Or where did you find that special weapon and enemy? You could literally tell someone, oh, it was at this exact coordinate. You can literally give them a 12-digit code to tell them exactly where it is in the world. Another interesting UI element that I am sure some people have picked up on is that the top left shows a shield, a sword, and an apple. This is not quite how it worked in the UI for Breath of the Wild. So the shield and sword are about the same, but the apple wasn't there. The apple is referencing the different items you can get and use that you would access by using the start menu in Breath of the Wild. This time, it's a part of the options that you can access on the fly, which is great. But what's also interesting about this is that in Breath of the Wild, that up arrow was actually used to switch around your different rune abilities. However, while that may have been the case, you still use the L button to interact with the different rune abilities if you need to activate them in some way. So in Breath of the Wild, the rune abilities required the use of at least 2 different buttons. In Tears of the Kingdom, it seems that the rune abilities are just working with the L button. Now, something else I noticed about the gameplay demonstration, it was actually divided into 4 different sections, each one on a particular rune ability, or these different abilities we see with the L button. And we have Recall, we have Fuse, we have Ultra Hand, and we have Ascend. But what I noticed is that they never showed the change between them. So right now we have this assumption that there may only be 4 abilities. And that may be the case. In Breath of the Wild, there were 4 initial abilities. That might just be the way it is this time around as well. But because they didn't show us switching, we don't even know what else there might be or how that UI may look when we hold down the L button to switch. So there may be something there. Now, looking at the fuse ability, we see that there's a whole bunch of different fusing options, and it seems that it may be limitless, and that's extremely exciting. But I've noticed some have the question of, okay, can we store some of our items that we fuse? And we have pretty much, I would say, confirmation of this, because in this one shot here I'm going to show you, you'll see that with the UI, where it says Log Club, we can see that they actually made a dedicated image for the fused item of the Log Club, which was a combination of a stick and a log. So what this suggests is that similar to other items like the shields, the sticks, and all of that, how they can be stored in your inventory, once an item is fused, it has its own name and its own unique image, implying that just like all the other items in your inventory, it can be stored there as well. And also, based off this image, it looks like we can even fuse already fused items with other items, stacking fusions. And we have seen, for those that are concerned about inventory, that with the fans, we can pick them up. Now, can we pick them up and then store them? That remains to be seen, but at least they're not just like giant logs where we can't even pick those up. Something else I want to point out about the symbol of the fuse mechanic, it uses a blue-green sword that looks somewhat like the Master Sword. It's even glowing at the end. Now, this could simply be to hint at, hey, you have a weapon, and you can connect your weapon to something else in the world, and it may be just that. However, the Master Sword is broken. We know this. What if the Master Sword can be connected to other items as well? And maybe the Master Sword may have additional applications on top of that. Perhaps it could have extra power surging through. We're not sure. Maybe it's limited. Maybe it's something we gain access to later on. But it's just something else I want to put out there for us to consider. Going to another one of the abilities, the Recall ability, very clearly you can reverse the time of an item. But we see that the dial suggests that can go pretty far, so there could be quite a bit of options with this. But considering how the fuse ability can interact with so many different things, what else can we recall in Tears of the Kingdom? We're not entirely sure. However, we do see that there is a lot of those blocks from the sky all over the surface of Hyrule. Aonuma shows us one falling down, and the way it's falling down, it seems like this event kind of happens just randomly all the time. And what it suggests is that the world in Tears of the Kingdom is going to be fluid and changing, as it is in Breath of the Wild with the weather, but in Tears of the Kingdom it seems like that's going to be taken to another level. And something else I want to point out about the world is that we see dragons just kind of flying around all willy-nilly. They're just there. Aonuma does not make any reference to them. which I find to be rather fascinating. My take is he didn't bring them up at all because he wants us to just notice them and think what they may suggest. And I think considering the logo, how it has dragons in it, and how Zonai have now been confirmed, and they have a whole bunch of dragon symbolism with their architecture, that the dragons will be playing a vital role in the story. What that is exactly, we're not sure yet, but this is just additional evidence suggesting that they are indeed a big deal. I wonder if there's a way to maybe fly or ride on these dragons. Only time will tell. Another element about the world that I noticed is that the yellow trees that we see in the sky are actually closer to the surface as well. Aonuma makes this reference that most of the time we'll see the yellow trees in the sky, but we actually see this one shot that shows the yellow tree pretty close to the ground that's on top of a mountain or an island that's connected to the ground. So it's pretty darn close there, and this just shows that there may be a lot of terrain that will be mixed up with the surface of Hyrule to really change it up, and it's not just going to be about going to the sky to see those differences. And we also see this random storm where there's cloud and thunder within it. It's kind of contained and we can see around it. So there may be more self-contained areas where we can see the weather. And what's fascinating about this is that in Breath of the Wild, we would see weather, but we would just see the effects of it from below. Because we can go so high up, we can see weather systems from the outside, which is very interesting. But let's now talk about the Ultra Hand ability. So, a few things I noticed about the Ultra Hand ability. We already know that this is what we use to build things and put them together, but there are some limitations. We noticed that there is a battery length, and with these items they don't last very long, but if we consider what we saw in the previous trailer, how there is these big sort of green boxes, those might be bigger batteries that we could attach to give us more battery life so we can do more of these vehicles. Considering that there's one that just hovers in the sky and that may be used for quite a while, we're going to need more than just like 5 seconds of using these devices, so we may be able to find these giant battery packs to extend the use for these different crafts. But something else I noticed about the Ultra Hand is that whenever you use it, you can see items that you can interact with highlighted in orange. And if you pay attention to the footage I have on screen here, you'll notice some logs and then those different fan things, but off into the distance to the left, we can see quite a few structures that are also highlighted with this orange. And if you look at it, it looks like a lot of those Zonai-like ruins, and they're pretty big, so there might be some heavy interaction here where we can change them around significantly. Considering that in the previous trailer we saw Link rotating around an entire island, there could be some significant puzzles that are going on in the air. And what's extra fascinating about this is that we didn't see any evidence of shrines. However, that idea to do puzzles rotating around different objects, that might be more heavily integrated with the areas that we see on the surface of the sky, which could lead to more exciting puzzles. I think a lot of people actually preferred the shrine puzzles that took place in the overworld of Hyrule as opposed to taking place in these random chambers. I'm not saying we can't get those as well, but there may be more of a focus to have environmental puzzles. One more element I want to bring up about the Ultra Hand is that we see this one shot when Link is on this raft in this lake, and he actually hits the middle green pasty thing. And what happens is that the entire device is activated. So it may be the case that this paste kind of connects the circuitry magically to all the other devices connected, and when you hit any part of that paste, it connects all of it and you can activate it. So just another little neat thing that I noticed. We get a closer look at that giant structure we've seen in a few of the different trailers, and we can actually make out what appear to be some steps and an actual pathway with an opening. It looks like this could potentially be the beginning of the game. It feels like it could be a chamber that Link exits out of. And my personal theory for this demonstration before we even saw it was that we would be seeing most of the Great Plateau equivalent shortly after Link wakes up and obtains the powers. Now we can see that Link does have access to the surface as Aonuma shows off throughout the footage, but I am going to stick firm to my theory here. I think it's actually pretty well supported. I think that what we're seeing here, what is mostly being explored, is an early part of the game. Let's point out, Link has 4 hearts. So consider this for a moment. In Breath of the Wild, you start the game in the Great Plateau and you have to acquire the 4 different abilities that you get from 4 different shrines that give you different orb, and these 4 orbs combine to give you either an extra heart or an extra chunk to your stamina. Considering that Link has 4 hearts here, it implies that he's gotten 1 potential power up here, suggesting that this might be simply immediately after we've beaten the Great Plateau equivalent. So maybe Link has freshly obtained the 4 different power-ups and now has access to the surface, and that's what we see in the footage. It shows very early on gameplay, immediately after we can leave the introduction to the game. And I think that Aonuma is revisiting the introductory area of the game, the Great Plateau area, in the footage for the most part, most of these Sky Islands. Because when we take a look at these Sky Islands, they feel pretty deeply connected and pretty significant in size. It feels like maybe this could be the equivalent to the Great Plateau, because we do see a few different biomes. We see some foresty areas, we see some cold areas, we see a cave area, we see a lake. So this just might be the Great Plateau equivalent. On to the final ability that we haven't discussed yet is the Ascend ability. Now, it's pretty amazing. I think there's a lot that can be done with this, and it could allow us to take us to vastly different parts of the map very quickly. I can envision us being at the very bottom of one of the giant mountains on the surface of Hyrule, and we enter a very low, small part of the cave, and we can use that to shoot all the way up to the peak, which would be a tremendous change in elevation extremely quick. And when I think about it, it just feels like they've given Link a lot of different ways to explore this world, a lot of which come from these new hand abilities. But we also see Link diving down. And when Link is diving down, he can even dive faster. So there's a little bit more animation work and options we have while falling through the sky. And I'm going to venture to guess that we're still just seeing the tip of the iceberg here. We didn't see any combat in the air, but it does look like we're going to be falling through the air for quite a bit. The world is vast. It looks incredibly detailed when we're falling through. But something I want to point out, when Link is thrown off the island, we can see waterfalls. And what's interesting about these waterfalls is that we can see them evaporating or just kind of ending not too far below the island. And what's interesting about this to me is that I have this theory about these large dark lines we see in the background that connect to the surface in some way. They might be related to these big malice holes that we see more of in the footage, maybe to the theorized underground portions of the game. And the reason this is important is because some people have speculated that perhaps those dark lines are simply just waterfalls in the background. But with this footage, it pretty much confirms that waterfalls aren't going to look like dark lines that go far down to the surface of Hyrule. They evaporate pretty quickly. So those dark lines, we still don't know what they are yet. A few more things I noticed. There's this other enemy we see that looks kind of like the constructs, but is a little different. It's actually the enemy we saw in one of the earlier trailers for Tears of the Kingdom, before it even had its name, Tears of the Kingdom, and it's called a Ranger Construct. We see the name very briefly. Now, something else that people have been talking about is that there is maybe evidence that there isn't any underwater exploration in the game because they didn't show it. First, I want to say that maybe there isn't. We don't know yet. It's not confirmed or deconfirmed is my main point here. We just don't have the evidence. So the absence of evidence doesn't confirm that it isn't there. That said, when Link is diving down, he does dive down into some water. Now, we don't see him being able to swim through it, so that's why some people think that there isn't underwater exploration. But let's point out that that river is actually pretty shallow, so there may have not really been much room to explore underwater. And then there's also the other consideration that it could be an ability that's added later on to the game. Even in Breath of the Wild, there were some abilities that were added later on to the game that gave us more options, like the Zora armor allowed us to climb waterfalls. There could be some type of ability that's given to us later into the game that allows us to explore deep underwater. In previous Zelda games, this is a common trope to be given something from the Zoras that gives us the ability to explore underwater. Maybe that will happen again this time around. If that does happen, that does suggest some linear parts to the game. Now, this game is clearly very open, but we still have no clue about why we have these abilities, what we're going to be using them for, like what's the goal, how are we going to progress the game, and what the story is exactly. There's still a lot of questions here that we just don't know about yet. So I'm not going to give up on underwater exploration yet. Really, I just think there's still a lot more questions here, and I think with what we saw, we're still just scratching the surface. There it is, that's my initial analysis for what's going on with the footage so far. Did you guys notice anything else that I didn't bring up? Please let me know in the comments below. Let's figure this out. Let's decipher this massive puzzle that is Tears of the Kingdom. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.